Today, we commemorate the memory of the holy new martyrs and confessors of Russia. Those men and women who suffered for the church, for the sake of Christ. And especially this being 2018, we commemorate or remember the 100th anniversary of the martyrdom of Saint Vladimir, Metropolitan of Kiev, who was murdered by the Bolsheviks on February 7th, or January 25th, in the old calendar. Brothers and sisters, millions of people suffered. Clergy were arrested shortly after leaving church after divine services. They were arrested in the middle of the night, taken from their homes. Some were even arrested and shot while performing processions, church processions around the church. Many clergy were arrested and sat in prison for years. They were tortured. They were interrogated. They were pressured to betray themselves and many other people. Several others were sent into exile to faraway places and suffered hunger and cold, abandonment, extreme hard labor, disease, and most of them death. Millions of people suffered just 100 years ago, simply because they believed in God and they wanted to live their faith. It's true. So many clergy and laity were seized and taken to the fields and shot in cold blood. The Bolsheviks changed monasteries into prisons, and there they tortured, especially the clergy, giving them the most heinous things to do. Within 10 years after the revolution, over 400 bishops, hierarchs, were arrested, repressed, and 300 of them were killed. Tens of thousands of priests and deacons and monastics were killed in cold blood. And many more sat for decades in prison and in exile. Holy Rus, which had hundreds, thousands of churches, by the end of the 1930s, had just very few left that were open. It's hard to believe. It's hard for us to understand here in faraway America. Yes, only 100 years have passed, but 1,000,000 years should have passed, and we still would understand and have compassion as much as though just 100 years. The perseverance that they demonstrated, their zeal for defending the truth, and their love for God moved them to bear all things. They showed great patience. It's hard for us to even imagine them experiencing physical torture and psychological torture, and still they never gave in. It's hard for us to imagine husbands and wives separated from each other, sent to different exiles and killed in front of each other's eyes. It's hard for us to understand what went through the hearts and minds of parents as they were arrested and left their children as orphans. But all this was done out of hatred for God and out of zeal to destroy His holy church. But these holy new martyrs and confessors of Russia, the tens of thousands and the millions who suffered, show us great example of faith and perseverance. The world around them changed almost in an instant. Yes, of course, the revolutionary tide started decades before them. But it was as though someone flipped the switch in November, October of 1917, and this huge tidal wave of persecutions began. Their world changed. One day it was glorious and safe to go to church, and the next day the church goods were being confiscated, and their priests were being arrested, and the doors were being closed. And shortly after that, they saw hundreds, thousands of churches destroyed, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes in broad daylight for everyone to see. There was an overt attempt to overthrow the church and destroy all of its teachings and the moral principles. Even Hollywood cannot think up of what was done by the Bolsheviks and atheists in the name of hatred for God. And here we are in the church, remembering them and praying to them for their intercessions before God in His heavenly throne, that we too be given patience and faith. Yes, the police may not be coming to arrest us. Yes, we may not have to sit in prison or watch our friends and neighbors be shot. But nevertheless, we too experience all kinds of difficulties. Of course, they cannot compare to those of the new martyrs. But nevertheless, we too have to display patience and faith. How many times do we give into sin? How many times do we let our appetites and our anger control us? How many times do we just give up? Many times. How many times do we worry about things that we shouldn't worry about and forget about the things that we should worry about? How many times do we pay more attention to our physical health and neglect the condition of our soul? How many times do we show little faith and impatience? And therefore, it is so important for us to remember such holy men and women who gave their lives for the truth, who gave witness of their love for God, Therefore, it is so important for us to always read about these holy men and women for inspiration, so that we don't give in, so that we don't complain, so that we don't lose our patience, but rather so that we can persevere. In the first half of the 20th century, brothers and sisters, the devil waged war against the faithful, and it was obvious. The devil always wages war. Here in the West, we may not have to face firing squads, but the battle with the devil is nevertheless always before us. The battle may not be overt, but covert, hidden, unseen, sneaky. He may seep into our lives in very unnoticeable ways, so that we can embrace his suggestions and take to ourselves the teachings of the fallen world and accept the moral changes in our society. We may find ourselves accepting his suggestions to pay more attention to the earthly life and enjoy the sweetness of this world, and spend all of our time and energy and forget about faith in God. The battle is real. It is real, as simple as fighting with one's anger, to bite your tongue, to as complex as making serious life decisions. But we see that regardless of the battle that we have to wage in our life, we are never alone. All of these new martyrs and confessors took upon themselves the cross of suffering, but were strengthened and fortified by our Lord Jesus Christ. Because all that they took upon themselves was for their salvation and for the salvation and cleansing of their society. And we too run to our Lord for strength so that we can carry our cross and not complain, but persevere to the end. Our Lord says in the end of today's second gospel reading, persevere to the end and possess your soul. Let us never give up. Let us always persevere. Let us always expect a struggle. If we don't struggle, or if we don't feel a struggle, our faith isn't alive. If we don't feel a struggle, we may have embraced the sinfulness of this world and taken it to ourselves. If we don't feel a struggle, we don't long for heaven, and we certainly don't love God. But, brothers and sisters, the new martyrs and confessors struggled to the end because they also felt joy. Yes, joy in prison, joy in exile, joy standing before the firing squads, joy in trying to bear with sickness and disease, because they felt that the Lord was with them. because they were touched profoundly by his grace, because they knew what glorious things awaited the faithful in God's heavenly kingdom, because they believed the words of our Lord when he says in the Beatitudes, "Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven." Let us always focus on God and focus on life to come. And in that, rejoice. Because whether we have to suffer 10 years or 90 years, it doesn't compare, even a minuscule doesn't compare to eternity, where there's no more suffering, but only life everlasting. Let us always pray to our Lord Jesus Christ that by the intercessions of the holy new martyrs and confessors of Russia, we may be given strength likewise to persevere to the end and possess our souls. Amen.